Got to ask the question. What is private property, Pauline? What is private property? Am I on private property? Is private property a corporation? Is that private property? Does constituting having a lease, a logo, and running a business out of a location, is that public or private? Can you define these things? And jurisdiction, Pauline, jurisdiction. So, and profiteprondra, Pauline, profiteprondra. Can you define all of these things? Like, I was going to show some people a different path. I went and got this rope here, Pauline, this rope, and I tied this fancy spike to it that I can screw into the ground, so that I can go around the fancy spike in a circle. In a circle, Pauline. I was going to show them something different, but is that how you define what property is with this fancy spike here? I mean, what's real, Pauline? What's real here, Pauline? And isn't that what matters? Who called in all movable property? So what's real property, Pauline? What's personal property? What's private property? What's public property? Where's the root tree of all of the things that link back to this fancy spike here, Pauline? This fancy spike here, it's on a rope, see? It's on a rope. Fancy spike on a rope. I was going to show them. I could go and get a rock and throw it on the ground and start with a rock. But it's easier to start with a fancy spike, because there I can put it in the ground and it doesn't move. It doesn't move, does it, Pauline? It hasn't moved for 100 years, so it shouldn't move, should it, Pauline? Shouldn't, should it? In the ground, circular. And that New South Wales law. Is that important? Is that relevant? Fancy spike in the ground. Is that totally relevant? Totally relevant? So, what is private property? What's a corporation? What's public property? Why is this fancy spike all relative to all of it, Pauline? Everything I speak is directed at you, Pauline Hanson. Everything. This is like a record. It's like putting it on the record, so they speak. You know, like the Hansard. Except it's the Hanson. This is the record called the Hanson. So is this fancy spike relative to that private property, Pauline? And the ignorance to this fancy spike? It's got rope attached to it. It does fancy things, magical things, Pauline, this fancy spike. Magical spike in the ground with a rope attached to it. Would that have anything to do with the private? The private. Shall we go into that? Some skywalking. Some skywalking around a rope. Around a rope, wow. And a fancy magical spike, Pauline. Interesting. But what is this concept of private property, please?